another episode of the Lowdown. This is a very special one, a very important one, actually, more than special. We've got to discuss what's going on in the world right now with the Black Lives Matter protests on an all-out, highest amount that they've been in a very long time. It's an important matter that needs to be spoken about, and we're here today. My guest today is Justin Pilgrim. Justin will tell you about himself in a second. But Justin and I have known each other. We're very good friends. We actually live next door to one another since we were kids. He's a Black man, obviously, which is why he's here for this conversation. And we're going to speak to him about essentially everything related to what's going on in terms of his experience, the things that he thinks. And we're going to have an open dialogue on essentially how we all get better from this. Buddy, how's it going?
It's going good. I can't complain. Finally got some good weather right now. So a lot of things going on right now in the world. So,
Yeah, it's good.
In COVID, yeah, it's definitely paying a toll.
2020 is a mess, man. 2020 is a mess. Everything
2020
about
has
it.
been a mess, man. We're only halfway through the year, so.
And all this stuff has happened.
Yeah, but we're going to be optimistic and hoping that the rest of the year ends out on a good note.
Okay, man. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself. Obviously, I sort of introduced you there very, very briefly. This is just an audio call, so there's no visual, which is why I mentioned that you're a Black man, because people can't see you right now. So I figure I let them know. But tell them about yourself. Obviously, we've known each other. So we both grew up in Malton, Ontario, which is right near the airport. I had been there my whole life. I was born in that house, essentially at the hospital near there. And then you moved in, I guess you were in what, grade 2 or something, grade 3?
I was like I would say the 5th grade. I moved in fifth grade.
Okay, yeah. So a very long time.
Exactly. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for having me on your show. It's an honor. And I really appreciate the fact that you're using your platform to talk about these matters. And obviously it's a uncomfortable conversation that we need to have. And I'm glad that you're taking your platform, using it to discuss these topics.
100%, man. It's important to do so. I think everybody sort of that has any type of platform sort of has a responsibility to some extent to have these conversations, right? Because I mean, obviously my platform is mainly related to healthcare and things around that matter, but racism is something that affects, doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? It's an underlying problem that exists in the world, and it affects everything. So I think everybody, really, it doesn't matter what field you have, what type of platform, but it's something that does need to be discussed.
100% agree with you. And on having to piggyback on what you just said. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, which you already know, but I'll let you know for your viewers and audience. So as you said, I'm a Black man. My mother is Jamaican. My father is Guyanese. Growing up in the household, I had a strong influence of our tradition, our cultures. All these things have played a part of my upbringing, of course. So it's very important for me. I was surrounded by a lot of Black history, whether it was Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, the list goes on. But also benefits of coming from where we come from in a melting pot in a city like Toronto or Mississauga is the diversity. So that obviously gave me the opportunity to be exposed to so many different nationalities and cultures. As you know yourself, right? We live right next door to each other.
Yeah.
And Italian, Jamaican on the left, we had Indian across the street, we had Maltese. So I was exposed to a little bit of everything, and it definitely has played a role in my upbringing, and I'm definitely proud of that.
Yeah, that's a really important thing that makes, and I guess we should also let people know we're actually like very, very good friends. Like we hang out, we do stuff together. This isn't just like something that I'm calling you after like, a couple of years and saying, hey, let's talk. I figured this was an important conversation to have with you because you're a Black person, but you're also, I would say, my longest running Black friend, right? Because we've been, and again, not just friends, like we grew up next door to each other. We played as kids all the time. We fought as kids all the time. Me, you, my brother. Your brother was a little bit older. He sort of stayed out of it, but we were always, my friends were over, your friends were over. We always interacted. We spent, I think a shitload of time with one another over at each other's houses and things. So, I mean, that's one thing that's really important. And I think, you said there about Malton and that and we're lucky to some extent here in Toronto because of the diversity for sure, right? Like
Mhm.
everyone is exposed to it. But I think about Malton. My dad had moved into Malton. I think it was like early 70s. I can't say for sure because he's not around anymore, but I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure it was the 70s. In fact, that house that we're talking about, my mom's still. You guys have moved out of that neighborhood, but my mom's actually still there. Um,
Right.
and once upon a time, Malton was a pretty homogeneous population, right? In terms of,
Yeah.
it was pretty much like, it was initially around World War II. There were a lot of those homes around there that were pretty much reserved for people in the army, and because the airport was there and they were going. And a
Right.
lot of, initially, the history of Malton is it was very much a very white population. And
Right.
my dad moved in when there was sort of this introduction of the Italians into
Yeah.
that community. And it's funny because the Italians, when they first moved in, experienced racism from those white people because it was different than what
Yes.
they were used to, right? And
Mhm.
then the homogeneity of Malton became very much Italian, right? Where at once upon a time it was like the majority of Malton was Italian, and then all of a sudden you had all these other cultures moving in, Black individuals, Indian individuals, and there was probably, I'm not going to lie because I even heard it from different circles growing up, there was a level of racism towards those communities. So it's really, I guess, messed up, and maybe there's some type of inherent underlying evolutionary thing to this, where every time that someone who's different from you starts to move in close to you and you're used to seeing one group of people, there's a level of racism that happens. And then what happened with Malton, and where I'm proud of my family, there was a mass exodus of a lot of those Italians once and I'm not saying that Italians are racist, like, I've
Mhm.
got to, I want to make sure the point of this conversation with me and you are cool. So I have no issue with this, but it's more about the listeners. I want to have an open discussion here so that we can work through this. And I think that's important. And I think I don't want to tippy toe around the reality of things. And I know for a fact that there was a mass exodus of Italians out of that community because they were worried about these other cultures that were coming in. And one thing that I'm really proud of my family is that it always stayed there. It stayed there because my family liked that community. They liked where it was low, like in terms of location, all the things that were important. We didn't, my family at no point said, well, we've got to get out of here because there's X nationality moving in next door, or whatever. It didn't matter as long as we were happy with what we had. And I actually loved the fact that I got to grow up in that community and spend, I didn't move out of Malton until I moved out of my mom's house, like in my mid 20s, right? So I lived there for a very long time. I'm 34 now, so I've essentially only been out of that community um, for like 8 or 9 years probably, and I still am very much involved in that community because my mom's still there, and my sister and my brother-in-law, my aunts, my cousins are very much still there. So I'm really proud of them that they didn't, that there was no, oh well, there's someone living next door to us that's not Italian like us, so then we should leave. Like, we had an amazing relationship, like my family, your family,
Absolutely.
we were always good. Like there were no issues. You also came from a really good family. Like, I was thinking about this the other day
Yeah.
before we were going to do this. Still to this day, I call your dad and your mom Mr. and Mrs. Pilgrim. Like, that's the level of respect, same as you did with my mom and dad. It
Yeah.
was always Mr. and Mrs. Nalli. Like, we were just, I think our parents ingrained that into us to be respectful of everyone.
Of course, absolutely. And to even just say what you're to go on what we were just mentioning right now, yeah, predominantly, if you look at Malton's history from the war times till now, if you look at the majority of people who own their homes, who still live in Malton over 40, 50 years, the majority of them are European,
Right.
whether it's Maltese, Italian, Greek. But yes, there was a big exodus where a lot of them left, whether it went to Woodbridge or wherever Bolton moved
Yeah.
more north. Um, but yeah, that's definitely the history of Malton. But there over the years been an influx of different minority races moving into Malton. Right now, it's very populated by Blacks and Indians right now.
Yeah.
And one of the issues I had personally growing up in Malton, um, with racism, I would say, is having to deal with the police. So that
Right.
I had many encounters growing up as a child with the police. And I say child, I can tell you I've been maybe pulled over in Malton driving for whatever it is, maybe about 20 times. And I kid you not, I only have about 2 tickets.
Right.
So all these other occasions, you can obviously get to what I'm getting at is what was that for? A lot of harassment, a lot of prejudice with the police going on there. I could even tell you times where I was just honestly riding my bike and being pulled over for nothing, you know.
Right.
And one thing actually stands out to me is actually I do remember the time where I was actually just minding my own business, riding my bike on the street, and I was pulled over by a cop. And I kid you not, I was no more than maybe 12 years old. And he came on, he pulled his car into the cruiser onto my driveway, and he asked me and my friend, said, are these your bikes? I said, yeah, these are my bikes. You live
Wow.
here? I said, yeah, I live here. Show me your keys. Showed him my keys. Open the door for me.
Wow.
And you know what? In hindsight, Lou, I think about this now. That would never fly with me now. But at the time, I was a kid. I didn't know any
Yeah,
better.
you don't
I
know
told
what
my
to do.
father. Oh, and he was livid. He went back to the police station. He had them come back with their constable and his lieutenant to come back to apologize about me. But this has been an ongoing thing with living in Malton. Or so it's a challenge that I've always had to deal with. And definitely with harassment, it's always been a problem, especially in minority communities where the population is black or whatever is brown or what have you. So it's always been an issue, and it's something that I've always had to overcome.
Yeah,
And there's so many things we can dive into, whether it's racism, systemic racism, or police brutality. There's so many things we want to dive into, but I'll leave it up to you. And also, you know, like you said, we've known each other quite some time. We have a great relationship, so I feel comfortable speaking to you about this. And like I said before, the white gloves are off. But by all means, we can take anywhere you like.
Well,
Absolutely.
if nobody else was listening to this and we didn't put it on air, we've had discussions about this. We have awesome discussions,
Absolutely.
and we're pretty open with one another.
Yes.
Even growing up, we were pretty like, and we may have even crossed the boundaries with one another many
100%.
times growing up because of how comfortable we were. Right? Like
100%.
that's just the way we were. It was that relationship. I always tell people I think of you like a little brother. Like I think about my graduation. When I graduated, my family was there and you were there with me at my graduation. You came with us. It was my family and you're like another, you're like a little brother to me. I've always seen you that way because you're a few years younger than me. And so, you know, I've always, you know, and there's always that respect. But you know what you brought up there with the police in Malton, I mean, that's essentially the tipping point here, that with George Floyd, that causes all of this, right? It's the idea of police brutality and a systemic racism towards certain individuals. Now, the one thing that I will say is, growing up in Malton myself, I've been pulled over by the police for no reason as well in Malton. I haven't been pulled over 20 times. I can't think of 20 times. And I think of at least 5 or 6. Yeah, 100%. In fact, and you know, it's interesting because I remember the times I would get pulled over the most is when I was going to the gym at Fitness 365. And you know, anytime I'm wearing like workout gear, so I'm dressed a certain way, so like, you know, big hooded hoodie or something like that, and I would go late at night and I'd be driving home. There were numerous times I was pulled over, and literally the cop would come up to the window to me, look in the car, because maybe from the outside, like, you know, for most people like would know what I look like from YouTube, but I have dark hair, dark beard, like I have darker features, right? So you know, from maybe inside a car, I look a certain way, and then when they get close enough, they seem a certain way. And I think where the difference is there, you know, the minute they would walk up to the car and see me, they'd ask for my license. I give them my license. They go back to their car. They come back and they just say, "Sorry, we were looking for someone else." And that's really interesting because your experience is totally different. Like,
are completely
because they're pulling you, they're stopping you, like in that example you gave as a kid. Like, I never had a cop. I think once in a while there may have been times too where cops may have stopped in front of our house, because between my house and your house, we even used to have like a little, you know, WWF like wrestling thing going on all the time. and so you know, maybe, but I never experienced something like that where a cop would have said to me, "Hey, is this your house?" Right? Is, you know, and that's where, and that's what people don't understand. I think that's where the racism really comes into play. Like that example I'm giving of me getting pulled over, maybe through a window, I look a certain way, they think I'm somebody, then they come up, they pull my record, they take a closer look at me, and now all of a sudden they're, you know, "Okay, sorry, sir, sorry to disturb you," right? I know for a fact I've been pulled over for no reason because they've told me that it was just purely under suspicion, but it was a very different encounter where it was just, "Sorry, we got the wrong person." There was no dumb questions like, is this your car, or this or that, like, and I think that's a big problem, that underlying assumption. And I think it ties in too, and you and I spoke about this, with there's a cultural problem too, right? Because Malton to some
Absolutely.
extent is a somewhat of an impoverished community. I mean, I've had multiple fights with City Hall in Mississauga, because Malton always gets dealt as like the ugly little brother of Mississauga, right? And
Oh
all
yeah, they refer to Moulton as the armpit of Mississauga.
that's right. Yeah, and I there's been times like, my fence on my other side, because if you looked at my mom's house, on one side there's no neighbor because it's a corner, and on the other side was your house. The corner where the fence is, where there's the stop sign, has been crashed into multiple times from like drunk
Oh, I
drivers.
remember.
Yeah, and it's not like it's been one time. It's been like 4 or 5 times. And the
Yeah.
amount of times that I've complained to City Hall and to the city of Mississauga about that, and nothing's been done. But if I was living in Port Credit or on Mississauga Road, you're damn right something would have been done, right? Because it's a different cultural demographic. And that's another point that's bullshit here, because you're not only segregating on race, which happens, but there's also a cultural segregation where it's almost like it's compounded, right? It's not just that you're black living in a poorer community. So it's like there's an extra thing there that gets people. And I think that's another problem that needs to be spoken about.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with everything you just said right now. And I'm telling you right now, and having being pulled over and harassed so many times, it's very uncomfortable. And at some point, you're going to break, right? It's just like there's only so much you can take. And the difference is when you get pulled over in that situation, and when the officer approaches your car and he sees your face now, maybe he's a little more at ease. Whereas when he sees my face now, there's more tension, and there's more hostility. And I've been called all kind of things before, but the most hurtful thing is I've been called was actually from a police officer that I was giving lip back to. And I always remember that. I'm not going to get on to exactly what was said or whatnot, but having that being said, it's like there's only so much you can take, right? And just going through this throughout my whole adolescent year is definitely played a course on me. All the things that I've been through with the police and living in the area, you build prejudice, and it's not easy. So just having that being said, it's definitely an impoverished area that needs a lot of work. And like I said, it's been ignored for quite some times, and it's time that we really start delegating some more funds and resources to these areas like that.
Yeah. Well, and another sort of to make the case about the cultural problem too, in terms of a social class problem, is what I meant before, right? Because Malton being a lower socioeconomic demographic, you and I had an individual, I don't want to say the name because I haven't spoken to the family, so I don't think it's right, but you and I know who we're both talking about. This was a friend of mine from high school who was in the same grade, and this individual went to your elementary school, and he was a few years older than you, like me. This person was killed by police earlier in the fall of 2019, right? This individual is an Italian, right? This is not a black person. And it just goes to show again that it's a compounded phenomenon, because it's not just, definitely race is a problem 100%. The argument I'm trying to make is it's compounded, right? You now also take a lower socioeconomic demographic like Malton, and then you compound that with race, you compound that with whatever else, it only gets worse and worse. And there's all these underlying systemic problems, right? Where we can talk about like Malton, how ignored it gets from the city, in terms of, like you put it perfectly, it is referred to as the armpit of Mississauga, because it's just like, it's always dealt with a different way. I've driven through so many parts of Mississauga where there's so many, different garbage bins, and it's clean and this and that. And then you go through Malton, and you're hard pressed to even find a city garbage bin anywhere, because they just don't care that much to put it in those areas. So yeah, man, it's a crazy thing that happens when you compound everything. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is I felt it living in that demographic, but you obviously felt it even more, because you add now the fact that you're a black person, right? And that you have a black family and all those things. And now all of a sudden you take whatever I experienced and multiply it by however much. And I'm not by no means trying to compare or say that I had this horrible upbringing. I love my upbringing. I love the life I had, all that stuff. I actually am very glad that I grew up in a community like that. Like my oldest friend in this world, Joe Kuzam, who works with me, and I know he won't mind me saying his name, is an Egyptian. Okay, that's my longest running friend in this whole world. We've been friends since before kindergarten. We still work together. He's a key person in my company. My wife, who I met in Malton, is of El Salvadorian descent. We now have a child, who you know, obviously. So he's half El Salvadorian, half Italian. You know, and all of my friends, I've got Italian friends, I've got Jamaican friends like you. I've got every nationality. It's been an amazing thing to grow up in that environment. Even in fact, my company, so many of the people that work with me actually come from that same community, because I just, you know, was always so ingrained with the community there. My family had been there for such a long time. I mean, even as an example, my older brother was one of your teachers, right? Because he was a teacher and taught you in high school and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. So it's an awesome experience to live in a diverse community like that. But I think that you know, the conversation really does raise, and this is why I think everybody's sort of saying, like, you know, all this stuff, people are just taking advantage of the situation to speak about this stuff. I think really we're at a tipping point, right? Where it's just like, enough is enough at a certain point. Like, how many times does the same thing need to be said, right, in order for some change to happen? So you said, and I'm talking a lot and I actually want to hear you more. You were saying that there's a level of prejudice. Did you mean from you towards the police, or from the police towards you, or both ways?
Vice versa. It goes both ways. I feel the same way about the police, and I want to be clear on this. Not all cops are bad cops. I understand that. I realize that, right? And it is a really tough job, right?
100%.
You
Dude,
get a call.
I'm going to tell you, I have patients of mine that are police officers.
Oh yeah,
they're legitimately good people. Like, here's 100%. The thing: the problem with policing too is, this is the problem. Like, one bad apple just spoils the bunch, right? Because you can have 100,000 police officers that are amazing, and then you have that piece of shit that did whatever he did to George Floyd, and it spoils it for everybody, because the vast, like 99% of cops don't agree with what happened there, right? And that's the sad part. So I'm glad you said that, because I don't have, you know, I think the vast majority of police officers are good people. And I also think they have an incredibly hard job, because they're always trying to figure out how to walk this line.
Right, exactly. And every situation is different. And, you know, the majority of times they're the first responders to these situations. You know, I have cops in my family, so I have a lot of respect for law enforcement. But what I don't have respect for is the police officers who are on a power trip. They grew up with prejudice in them. A lot of times what I find is you have police officers coming in our communities, in the smaller inner cities, whatnot, and they're not from these communities. So they're coming to police in force, and they're not aware of, and they don't have very much communication with the people inside the communities and the environments that they're policing. So that just causes a big misunderstanding, and they're automatically going in with these, you know what, I would say,
like biases, inherent biases, I guess.
Yes, exactly. But also, I'm also comparing our system and also what's going on in America right now. I think America is a lot different also. And also I'll say this, that in Canada here, I think we have it a lot better than it is in America. When I get pulled over, I don't have to fear for my life.
That's right.
Am I nervous? Do I think there's maybe a possibility things can go wrong? Not as much as when I was a little bit younger. But to be honest with you, driving black in America in certain states, no, I don't. It makes me very uncomfortable. Things can turn sideways very quickly, and only because I'm not American, so I'm not going to speak too much on American history, whatnot. But I do know they have a long history of racism, systemic racism, you know, and it goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, which we all know. So I'm not going to dive too deep into that. But to put things into context, it's definitely nerve-wracking as a black man when I get pulled over by the police and worry about the situation that I'm going to fall into. And I recall one time when I got pulled over, and this is, again, when I was living in Moulton, maybe about 18 years old, got pulled over, no reason, didn't give me a reason why I was pulled over, asked me to get out the car. And this is when I recall the feeling of like, oh, okay, what for? He had me come out the car, sit on the curb, and this was on Dairy Road, when you're approaching the 427, right there by the storage, the gas station there. Had me sit on the curb. This is broad daylight. This is but maybe 4 p.m. during rush hour, and didn't handcuff me. Told me to stay there. He called 5 other cruisers. Wow. 5 other cruisers just for me. I don't have a criminal record. I've never been in trouble with the law. So
you've always been. You're a good person. Like I can purely vouch for that. You've always been very respectful.
Yeah.
You also, like, here's the other thing. You don't look like a gangbanger or anything. You don't like.
No.
You know exactly. What I mean. You don't wear that type of stuff. Like you fuck, man. You dress better than me. You and Paco, who's I gotta have Paco on here one time too, because he always. Paco, so just again for our listeners, Paco is also a friend of ours from high school, also a black man. He's also the director of physician engagement with my company, PinPoint Health. And I knew Paco from high school, but I really got to know him much better through you, obviously. And he's another person who has incredible ideas. And I was speaking to him yesterday actually. And he's Paco. Paco's a very smart guy.
I know very well. Yeah.
Paco's a very, very smart guy, and he's got some incredible ideas he wants to share. But yeah, like, I mean, and I only brought that up because you guys are always, every time I'm with you guys, I'm always like, wow, I'm so underdressed. Like, you guys always overdress.
No, so in situations like that, and I'm telling you, that situation where I was sitting there on the curb when I had about 5 police officers. For no reason, I wasn't giving any explanation why I had still been pulled over. My phone rang, and it was my mother. The police officer allowed me to answer it. It was my mother. And she said that one of her church sisters had seen me being pulled over by the police. And you can only imagine what it is for Black women to raise children in these environments where you don't feel safe, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, it's not as bad as the States. Could you imagine if you were a parent and let's say you live somewhere like in Florida, for example, where the gun laws and regulations there are completely that's a different story completely. But growing up in a situation like that, where if your child wanders off on the wrong person's property, they're liable to be shot dead on the spot with no penalization.
Yeah, that's
right.
Crazy.
So it's really crazy. Like I said, I'm Canadian, so I'm proud that I don't live in those circumstances. But we still have our problems here.
So going back to that encounter that you had with the police on Derry Road that you're talking about, did they end up essentially telling you what they pulled you over for, or like what came of that?
No, I was told that I was we wanted to check your information out. We were looking for someone at the moment, and that was it. But Lou, you can use that excuse for every traffic violation.
Yeah, 100%. That's ridiculous.
There was about 5 different cruisers that pulled up within 2 minutes, right?
Wow. So and your mom to get a phone call like that, like, you know what I mean? Like that would scare the ongoing thing. And your mom is potentially the nicest lady in the world, may I add, because she's Yeah, and I think she might actually like me more than you, eh? Like, she's always. I remember every time I'd be cutting the grass and stuff, she'd always tell me, she'd be like, "Louis, if the girl that marries you is gonna be one lucky woman." I was like, I always thanked her for that compliment. She was always so nice.
And you always remember that compliment.
Yeah. Oh, dude, always. Like, I even tell my Jocelyn sometimes when she's treating me badly, I'm like, "Yo, I'm gonna call Miss Pilgrim on you because she knows what I do for you." And so it's
well, let's just say that, you made us me and my brother look bad when it comes to like around the house, right?
Oh, I know. She used to get mad at you when you wouldn't cut the grass and stuff. That's okay.
Oh yeah. And you know what? To be on a serious note, when your father passed away, you really stepped up to the plate.
Thank you, man. Yeah,
that's something I can honestly say. You really and meanwhile, while we were still being babied and pampered by our parents living at home still, you had definitely taken the initiative and you became the man of the house, and that was obviously on display for everyone to see. So I commit and tip my hat to you for that. Definitely.
Thank you, buddy. Well, that's the thing with that is you just sort of go with it. But I think that not that I want to concentrate on my dad, right? But I want to use that to talk about something with you, because I spoke about this actually with Paco, and we talked about how, in order to make a change, right, around this whole racism conversation, there needs to be a couple things. Number one, there has to be like, changes from an institutional level, from a systemic type of, where things get changed. But there also has to be a change with the individual, right? And so I use that example of me, like, and I've read a lot of books in my life and all this stuff. So, you know, and there's a lot of stuff out there that you can either fall victim to your story, right? Like whatever your story is, like you're talking about me losing my dad. That story could have gone one of two ways. It could be the way that it is now. I stepped up to the plate. I didn't use it as a victim to say, like, you know, I lost my dad at a young age, so then therefore I don't have this or I don't have that, blah, 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 right? Whatever it may be. And then you go down one path. Or you can use it to your advantage to teach you, to make you stronger, all those things, and you go down a different path, right? And one of the things that me and Paco were talking about, and I want your take on this, is there's also a level of responsibility that I think Black individuals need to take for, and the reason why I bring this up, and I want your opinion, I'm just gonna throw it out there because I'm not a Black individual, so I can't commit to that. But my worry about all this stuff is that people fall into like the idea of group identity and victimhood, right? Where you say all of a sudden, like, you know, I'm a Black person, and because I'm Black, I therefore can't do all of this. So you become a consequence of your victimhood, right? Or you can try to overcome that victimhood too, right? Like, is that something that resonates with you or not? Because I know in speaking with Paco, he was all over that. He's huge on that. He's like, listen,
100%.
every Black individual also needs to overcome this themselves. Like, that's part of the solution, is individuals need to be better. And okay, so that is, so tell me more about that. Like, tell me your take on that.
My take on this is this, is as a Black man, I need to hold myself accountable, right? Okay. I'm going to give you an example. Actually, something that recently happened. I've been recently trying to sell a car, and throughout the period of time, I'm dealing with COVID. So I have people coming and saying, hey, make sure when you come, you bring your mask and your gloves.
Right. Yeah.
You want to test drive this car, whatnot.
Yeah.
I saw about maybe 3 individuals at first, white guy, 2 Indian guys, whatever. Everything went fine. They didn't purchase the car. On the 4th situation, I had 2 gentlemen come and see me, and they had the mask on, and they were both Black.
Right.
And initially, for some reason in me, I got on my guard.
Really?
And they had their mask on and whatnot. And you know what? It's like it's almost as if I'm trained to think this way.
Wow.
And it makes me actually disgusted to think that why is that even in me, right? So that is something that's definitely a problem, and I need to hold myself accountable for. So long story short, they came, and within 10 seconds, that feeling completely went away. We start conversation, but just for that split second where I didn't have that feeling before. So what is that? And that's what I've been thinking about lately a lot. And it comes down to a lot being able to hold yourself accountable, and also not fearing your own people, you know. And there's a lot more issues that we need to, as Black people, address what's happening into our community that we can't have anyone else solve, you know. Yeah. I'm not making any excuses or whatnot. You know, I don't want to point the finger at racism for everything, and that's not the case at all. You know, and we're not looking for handouts at all either, right? But we are looking for equal opportunities. Yeah. For example, I'm going to give you another example that happened actually pretty recently. And I was actually debating whether or not I should bring this up, actually, and it really infuriated me. I was recently at a tire shop, and I was a mechanic shop, whatnot. And I had entered the mechanic. I was waiting in line, and they were playing the news in the waiting room here. And there was 3 gentlemen back in the back room in the office, I guess, and they were watching the same thing, CNN, what have you. And what happened was 2 of them, I was overhearing their conversation, and I think 2 of them were talking and saying, you know, this is really terrible. What's going on, man? This is the worst. I can't believe this. This is still happening in today's day and age time. And I was listening. And then one gentleman said, well, it's been about 150 years since they've been free. When are you going to get your act together?
Wow.
Lou,
Holy
I was livid.
My God.
It took every bone in my body not to get up, kick down that door. And anyways, listen, I got up, I walked towards the door. I stood outside the door. The door was open, by the way. One gentleman came out, saw me. He said, oh, hey, how are you doing? How can I help you? I didn't say anything. Then after 3 of them scrambled out of the room. At that point, I went on a little rant. I'm not going to, just because of your viewers, I'm not going to repeat what I said. Right. Let's just say I blew off some steam. The rest scrambled. The other gentleman took me to the front, and he assisted me. He didn't look me in my eye once. He was ashamed. He was embarrassed. And by his voice, I could recognize that it was him who made the comment.
Wow.
And why I want to use this example is, what is this guy going back home and teaching his kids?
That's right.
That's my problem.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about everything that's going on in the world right now, when is this going to stop? It's not going to stop. Us having this conversation, it's not going to stop. You know, it's going to take a lot of things. And while everyone's protesting and marching, and I know Black Lives Matter and everything, but also I think as Black people, what we need to do is we need to come up with a strategy of, okay, what do we want?
That's
what
right.
do we want out of this?
You know? And I think that's an important thing.
What do we want? And okay, you know what? You may not get everything here on this list, but you know what? What's priority? What needs to change? And that's what's important.
And I think that's like a big thing. So a lot of social justice movements that happen nowadays, right? Whether it's this or whatever other social, there's been such a change, right? Because if you look in history with social justice movements, there was a specific thing that they wanted out of it, right? Like whether it's women wanting to get the right to vote, they want that. So it's very clear what they want, right? I think a lot of the problems nowadays is there's a lot of ambiguous stuff out there, because it's like, but what's the ask, right? Like what is, and I think that's important to have an ask, because then individuals can also do it themselves, right? They can say like, oh, this is what this group wants, so this is what I can do as an individual, or this is what I can do at the company level, or if I'm a politician, here's what I can do in terms of policy, et cetera, et cetera. But I wholeheartedly agree with you there. I think the big thing right now is, listen, the protests are 100% important. They're 100% essential.
100%.
I don't agree with the looting and the riots and all that stuff, only because, dude, I've seen videos of like impoverished places in the States where there's like elderly Black women who are essentially crying, saying like, you've ruined my store, like you're worried about, they're hurt. Yeah, exactly. You're not helping a problem by taking away someone's income, right? Like you're not every store that you're throwing something through is a $1 billion industry, right? Most small businesses are surviving. They're just paying the bills. So I don't agree with that stuff, right? But I do agree with the protests, because I think the protests bring to light the issue, and the more of them there are, it's, you know, the crazy part about all of this though is that it's mixed in with COVID, right? And myself as an individual in healthcare, I struggle because I believe in the protest, but I'm also worried about the people being together in large groups and all this stuff. And also sort of brings up another thing, like why, like people wanted to protest for COVID in terms of shutting down the world, and people weren't allowed to do that, right? Like, and I'm not saying that they should or they shouldn't. I just think it's a really fucked up time, because, you know, you're dealing with this health crisis that in large groups is a potential problem. And I worry about, especially in the States, the spread of this disease, which also seems to be disproportionately affecting the Black community, probably because tied in with the socioeconomic stuff that we talked about, that more impoverished communities.
When you go to communities in America and you go to these impoverished communities, there's a liquor store, there's a fast food store on every corner. Right. It's poison. It's poison. You know it. I know it. Yeah. Right. There's no opportunities there, you know, and there's no resources. So yeah, it's definitely affecting these communities a lot more.
So on the topic then of like, you know, because you're an individual, what are some of the things you would love to see happen? Like, what are the, like, you know, what are some like shorter term goals with longer term goals? You know, because not everything is going to happen with the snap of a finger, right? Like right now, this whole movement about completely defunding the police, I don't know how I feel about that. And I don't know because I haven't looked into it fully, and I'm hesitant to make an opinion on like, you know, if that's I definitely get that if you got
different,
go for it. No, go for it.
I think people have different perspectives of when they say defund the police. I don't know what that exactly means. In my eyes, what it means is taking out some of the police resources and maybe putting it into some of these educational systems. Maybe we need to fund some of these other programs more.
100%. That's
as opposed to we're paying our hard-earned taxpayers' money for the police, which they do a great, amazing job in some situations, but in other situations where you have cops like this guy who killed George Floyd, I'm not even going to mention his name. Honestly, if I can tell you how I really feel about the police officers like that, we'll go down another rabbit hole. But to get to the point is, some of the things I think we need to definitely do is working on police training. That is definitely something that needs to be worked on better. We need to be able to hold, like I mentioned, holding Black people accountable for what's going on. We also need to be able to hold.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by holding Black people accountable?
Oh no, just as what's going on in our own communities. And I'm not talking
Right.
about racism. I'm talking about some of the things, the bad habits that we may have.
Right.
And
Like the example you gave, like with when you were selling your car, like that initial apprehension, like just
exactly. That's
got
what
you.
I mean. Exactly. So thank you for clarifying me that for
No,
that,
no
P.
problem. No problem.
But also everyone needs to be held accountable.
Yeah.
Everyone. So I shouldn't just say Black people, but I mean everyone. So
Yeah.
when we have officers like this situation that goes and kills an innocent unarmed Black man, he needs to be held accountable. Do you
Yeah.
know how many? Okay, listen. If you think it's hard to being a Black man in 2020, could you imagine what it was like to being a Black man in 1950, in
Probably impossible.
1930s,
Yeah.
in
Crazy.
1920s? Let's not even talk about the 1800s.
Well, dude,
You know what?
before you go on with that point, let me just sort of frame a reference here. When my dad
Mhm,
first came to Canada from Italy, okay,
mhm,
there used to be, and he remembers this in downtown Toronto, there were
yeah.
signs on the streets that said no Blacks, no Italians, no Jews. And
Roots.
they didn't use those nice terms. Let's just put it that way, right? Like those,
Absolutely.
that there was a segregation. In fact, in some places they also said no Irish, because
Yep.
the Irish were associated with Catholicism, which went against the Anglo-Protestant type of agenda, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that stuff back then was no joke, right? So the point you bring about what it must have been like to be a Black man in the 1950s, like probably horrendous. Like
Horrendous.
the amount
And
of
you know
stuff
what?
that they would have had to go through is
Oh,
crazy.
Lou, could you only imagine? Could you only imagine how many George Floyds there are out there?
Oh, tons.
How many untold stories, when you could be back then where you could be openly racist,
Yeah,
and think about all the people who don't have a voice, people who live on little small dirt roads that don't have a voice, and we don't know. These are untold stories. When I think about people like Emmett Till, the list goes on. There's
yeah,
so many other stories we can tell where people were modern day lynching, and we're still doing modern day lynching. When you see Black people being shot in the back like 10, 11 times unarmed, and then the
crazy.
cops are going to be put in trial, fired for without pay, whatnot. But there isn't repercussions. There hardly is, and that's what we're tired of. So when I say the police holding themselves accountable, um, there needs to be discipline action, definitely. For
Yeah.
example, I don't know how you feel about the situation, but I wouldn't be surprised if this guy walks. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets, I don't know, like 6 months in prison. I don't know, because I've seen this story a million times. And the only difference between now and 1940s is we have cameras now and we'll be able to
Right.
film it. But this has been happening for a long time at a large rate. And you know what? It's probably getting better,
Yeah.
because the
I
generation of,
I
I think
don't.
it's dying out. Like, for example, when I mentioned the guy in store where I said, what is he teaching his children? One of the things that I like about the protests, what's going on, is it's giving the younger generations a view, and they're being able to see and open their eyes to different things. So maybe they're not going to grow up with so much hate and racist in their hearts. So it's a
Yeah.
different generation, but it's still going to continue. But if we can continue to minimize this and give other people more opportunities. But sorry, to go back to what you said also about what do I want to see. That's one of the things about just maybe the police having better training regulations, being
Yeah.
held accountable more. I want to see more elected Black officials. And when I say that's something I would like to see, but also it goes back to, well, we just can't, it's just not going to happen out of nowhere. Black people need to
To run for
run.
those. Yeah. They need.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's
They
why
need to
I
run
think
up for those
the communities, we
positions.
still need to hold ourselves accountable, and
Yeah.
we need to, we can't wait for handouts, right? We need to be able to build wealth. And let me tell you something, that's one thing in the Black communities is there is any education about how to deal with anything, money, how to save, or anything, investing, anything like that. These are all gems that are not shown to us, and it makes me sick.
Yeah.
I can honestly say I'm a grown ass man now, and I learned how to budget at a very late age,
Yeah.
and it's very, very sad. It's very sad. I learned about money later on in life. I've had it come through my hands, and I've had it go, and that's one of the issues too. That's what we need to do, as when I say speak about some of the things that us holding ourselves accountable for. right? We can't hope for other communities to do it. We have to do it ourselves. But that's also one of the things I want to talk about. And another big aspect is obviously education.
Yeah.
For example, where we went to school, we weren't funded very well. But
No,
when you look at other schools like Philip Pocock and whatnot, they were funded galore,
that's
right?
right.
So that's
Well,
another
and
problem.
that goes
That's
back
huge.
to the societal problem, what we were talking about,
Exactly.
because there's this. It really is BS when you look at that, right? Like those funds should be distributed equally, like amongst all neighborhoods. Like, why does one kid in one school get the advantage to have better resources and all these things, whereas another individual, 5 kilometers away, can't get that? That's bullshit. Like that.
Before jerseys when we were in high school.
Sorry.
When we were in high school, they could hardly afford to give us jerseys when I was going to that school there. Maybe they're a little bit better.
And we went to the same high school, so
exactly.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
We practiced track, and we had the best track team, but we didn't have any resources. We ran on the track on concrete outside and trained. Yeah. Right? Yeah. We didn't have resources. We didn't have a football team. We never had a lot of things, and not just speak about athletics. I mean, actually. Education too. That's even a lot more important, obviously, is education, right? So that's also one of the things I want to see a lot more changes happening, is give these communities more funding, more resources, right? Maybe a lot of these kids wouldn't be getting into drugs and into gangs or whatnot if they had more options and resources.
Well, I mean, the research on that is pretty clear, that when resources go up in an area, crime goes down. Right? Like that's very, very well established. That's where I sort of see something like, I guess when I say defund the police, and I'm not sure about it, like, I don't necessarily think that we should get rid of the police service, because to me, that's crazy. But does that mean minimizing some resources there and diverting those funds into other things that can bring up different communities? And as you bring that community up, then all of a sudden crime goes down, people don't want to be involved in gangs, whatever it may be. 100%. To me, that's a no-brainer, right? Like we should be doing that. We should all, and the other thing you said there that I want to hold myself accountable for too, is that I think we all have a responsibility to change and be better, right? There's this problem in the world that when you change your opinion, people think that you're a fake. And to me, that's BS. What I think is when you change your opinion, you show how much of an adaptable individual you are and how much you can evolve as a person. One example that I'm going to give towards that, and this is me specifically talking about me, okay? And I'm going to be transparent because I think it's important. When the Black Lives Matter movement initially came out a number of years ago, when I heard that term, one of the things that I always thought is like, but why do isn't all lives matter? And you've heard this, right? You've heard people say, but all lives matter.
I'm glad you talked about this right now. I'm going to give my opinion after.
And I'm going to give you on how I changed, because I saw something during all of this stuff, which this is why protesting is important, because when protest happens, it brings education to light to people, and then people can learn. And as knowledge is built, you create power. And as power is built, you can evolve as a human being. And I evolved in the last few months because when I saw something, because I still sort of, I guess to me, I didn't understand more than anything, because do Black Lives matter to me? Have they always mattered? Yeah, of course, 100%. But I guess I had this thought, but why is that the slogan? Why is it not that all lives matter, right? Mm-hmm. And then I saw something that said, and this is what really brought it out to me, where I was like, I get it now, and I get why that's such an important term. The thing was they were talking about, like, why is it for this people think it should be all lives matter? But if you say something like, when there were the Boston Marathon bombings, it was Boston Strong. When there were shootings in France, it was, when you say Boston Strong, that doesn't mean that no other city matters. It just means you're bringing light to a specific issue. And there was like a moment, like a light came on when I saw that. I was like, I get it now. That's not something to say that other lives don't matter. It's just simply a statement to show that Black lives also matter. And so now I'm proud to say Black Lives Matter 100%. Like, I'm all on that, because I'm able to, and this is why protest and all this stuff is so important, because I mean, you've known me my whole life. I don't think I'm a racist. I don't think you would think I'm a racist, but I still thought that this term Black Lives Matter was inherently racist, and really it should be all lives matter. But now I get why it's not. And I understand why it's such an important term.
Right. I'll give you an example. Would you go to a breast cancer rally and start protesting against the organizers and saying,
That's right.
What about prostate cancer?
That's right. Yeah,
no, we know all cancer matters. We're trying to cure that. But right now, this is the cause, right?
Right, exactly.
I don't think we need to protest that White Lives Matter, because the institution, the constitutions, the foundations of all the principles of this country in America, and America is built off of, is to protect, was written for
everybody,
to provide for white people. I strongly believe, because, for example, when you look at some of the, like America, for example, their laws and their amendments were written for white people, to protect white people. They weren't written for black people, people of a minority. We were slaves. Yeah. Right. So we know White Lives Matters. Everything around us is a representation of that, right? So it's the cause is Black Lives Matters. Yes, we know all lives matter. Filipinos' lives matter. Indians' lives matter. Everybody.
And that's the point,
but
right?
The cause is Black Lives Matter.
That's right. The cause Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that other lives don't matter. It's your example there is perfect. If you go to a breast cancer rally, you're not going to say, well, why do we only have to say breast cancer? Like, why can't we say prostate or lung? It all matters. We know it all matters. But right now, this is the cause. And I agree with you. And I think it's a perfect way to end this, because I know you're tied for time. Black Lives Matter.
Definitely.
And that's the cause. Black Lives Matter. And I think everybody needs to start really doing what we're doing, like really start to dive into this and be open to having your preconceived notions changed. Because if they're changed, that's how we influence. Once we change ourselves, we then can change our kids, our families, our friends. Those people can then change their workplaces. Those places can then change their politics. And then before you know it, the whole world has changed. So my friend, my very good friend, my little brother, Black Lives Matter, buddy.
Black Lives Matter. And again, I want to thank you again for having me on your show and your platform. And I really want to encourage you and other people to use your power and your platform to have this conversation more, because it brings nuance, and I think it's very valuable. And I definitely appreciate you, man.
100%, man. I appreciate you too. Anytime you want to come back on, this platform is always open to you. And, you know, you and I call her your wife. I know you guys still aren't married. You guys are coming over next week for.
Oh yeah, she's the wife. She's the one.
So you'll come over for a social distance. We'll have a barbecue in the back with social distance regulations, but it'll be nice to see you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, buddy. You have a good one. Okay.
All right. You take care.